Wonderful. So welcome everybody to Winning Minds. We are a part of Women Inspiring Network, which is a platform to bring together women content creators, entrepreneurs, leaders with the next generation to share their ideas in a paid forward movement to see how we can unplug and unpick your ideas, your achievements, your journeys, and create learnings for the people who are aspiring to reach the next level. Today we have a very special set of guests. We have, let me just do the quick introduction, and then I will, we'll just lead into the session for today. So first of all, we've got Manreet Sodhi Someshwar. Manreet is an award-winning author. She's written 5 books. The first few were the Mehrunisa series, followed by The Long Walk Home, and the latest one is Radiance of a Thousand Suns, which has won multiple awards already, including Ladli, the Gender Sensitivity Award. Manreet has lived in many countries and continents, originally from India, lived in Asia, and currently is in New York. And she writes extensively beyond the books, for multiple magazines and publications. So welcome, Manreet.
Thank you.
We've got Adrija. Adrija is a digital journalist with CNN News 18. She's an associate editor there, and she's been covering gender-related stories across India. And obviously, in her journalism journey, she's been through First Post, NDTV, Huffington Post, and written about a variety of topics, genres, and so on. And she's not a first-time winner of Ladli, but in fact, she's won the award before as well for 3 other stories. So really fantastic to have you here, Adrija. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Also, just one thing, I've just joined a new organization. I'm working with a fact-checking website called Boom Live now. Yeah. So,
okay, fantastic.
Yeah. And excited to, I will find out more about gender and fake news.
Fantastic. And he is founder and director of Feminism, which is one of the leading branding and communication firms in India, with a very strong India lens that brings into her work. Preeti has been very closely associated with gender sensitivity and with Ladli Media over many, many years. And Preeti, really a warm welcome to you. Wonderful to have you here. So today, we're talking about gender sensitivity, and first of all, Population First and Ladli Media have been championing this cause of the girl child, and as all women achievers today on this platform, we have a set of people who've broken the norms in many ways. They have made a difference for themselves and in Egypt, surroundings and so on. But what is it that we can learn from them? Because as a country, as a nation, there is still a lot that needs to be done, right? Despite so many years since independence, the girl child and the issues around the girl child continue, and they continue not just in our and in our small towns, but continue even in the larger cities. The history of women, perception of women, their ability to chart their lives, still seems to be, not as much, open and full of freedom and full of joy as we would like it to be, right? So today we hope to not just understand the personal journeys of Manreet, Adrija and Preeti, but also learn from them to see the kind of stories that they have crafted. What have they learned from the trenches? What are we seeing in media? How can we shape the mindsets of people around us, of the girls and the boys, of men and women, so that we take this entire notion of gender equality, gender sensitivity, and an equal opportunity for the women of the next generation forward, right? So with that, let me just ask a little bit about each one of you, your personal journeys, what led you into creative writing, and then how did you choose to adopt the gender lens? So Manjeet, let's begin with you, for you personally, because you have worked in banking, and from there, you went into creative writing. So what was your journey? Were you always interested in creativity and writing and fiction, and and what led you to write the first book? And from there, how have you sort of approached the female protagonists in your different books?
Yeah, thank you, Amrita. That's a wonderful question to begin our discussion with. So I always trace my, the point I am in time now to the place I was born in, which is a very small town, bang on the border between India and Pakistan. It's called Firozpur. At the time of India's partition, it was a Muslim majority town. And therefore, by the laws of partition, it should have gone to India. But there's a lot of speculation about why it didn't. But what happened as a result was that a Muslim majority town within 3 months became Muslim minority. And obviously there were stories in the air of the place, that I grew up with, but there were always a lot of silences around the stories, especially when they came to the issues of women. And as a child, you're hearing something interesting, you try and eavesdrop, but then the conversation peters off when they see that there's a child in the midst. Anyway, so I never paid much attention to it, as any child does. But during my adolescence, I witnessed very closely what is called the Sikh militancy, which resulted in Operation Blue Star in 1984. Once again, I was busy with my board exams, and I didn't pay any heed to it. It's only when I really got out of my home state, Punjab, and I went to Calcutta, I'm Calcutta, and then Bombay, and then I moved out of the country. This was in early 2000 when I was in Singapore, and I decided to take a sabbatical from work because my work had been fairly hectic. I worked in consulting and marketing and a lot of travel. At that point in time, I don't know what it was, maybe something to do with sort of the very serene, sterile environment of Singapore, which was such a contrast to where I had come from. But I felt the urge to write a short story, then which became another short story. And by the end of 6 months, my sabbatical was ending, and I had a collection of short stories, which I showed to friends who I think were very kind, because they said, well, they aren't bad. And I took that as motivation that I could continue. But one of those stories just, wouldn't leave me. And I felt I had to do more. And to write more, I had to really understand the history of Punjab. I had to understand what I had witnessed while growing up, but never tried to understand. And, that led to a 9-year-long journey. And the book became The Long Walk Home, which is my first book. And that, during the writing of that book, I was teaching myself how to write, because I've been an engineer and a business graduate. All the writing I had done was PowerPoint presentations. So, I had to teach myself to write. I had to teach myself my own history. And I had to go back to those oral stories and find out what they were saying and what was not being said. And that was the journey, really. So since then, there has been no looking back. The sabbatical went from 6 months to a year, and I decided I was having such a good time doing what I was that I didn't want to continue with my corporate career anymore. It was a very rash choice, but I'm glad I stuck with it, because I've been writing for 20 years now, and I've published 6 books. And I think the common theme in my book is the female protagonist, or very strong female characters, and examination of questions on faith and fundamentalism, sort of the so-called secular nature of our society. So yeah, those two really have been kind of themes which run through my work. And I guess as the discussion progresses, we can discuss more of why and how. But a simple answer would be that I grew up in Punjab, which is a land of patriarchy. But I grew up in a family where both my parents were feminists, and very clear that they wanted their daughters to grow up and have careers. So it was a contrast, my own home environment situated in the larger context of Punjab, which I think has made me who I am.
It's fantastic, because our social conditioning and nurturing plays such a great role in helping us seek things above and beyond, right? So it's really fantastic. So Adrija, what about you? What did you always love to write? and how did you join journalism? And from there, why the stories on gender sensitivity?
Right. So, why I wanted to write was because I was an introverted child and I was curious. And I just read and wrote like every other children. It continued because I didn't have too many friends. So it was not like, I was doing other things. But the thing is, the journey towards, very similar to Manjeet, actually, I'm also very privileged because my parents both are very feminist and they constantly question gender roles. At home, I would see my father cook. I would see my mother go out. Those things. And also, my mother questioned a lot of times about gender roles. She stopped wearing the sindoor very early on, a week into the marriage. So she was this just person who would just be rebellious against every little thing that she was asked to do. That I wouldn't really understand the depths of it so much, and but as and when it progressed and just happened to be a journalist. In fact, I wanted to be a business journalist. I studied economics, and my parents wanted to get into banks, and all of that was happening. But when I started journalism, also I wanted to focus on development, economy, all of that. And while I was doing that, I realized that there's just so many stories on women that we are not reporting. I don't read them, and I was curious to know. Nobody spoke to women. And throughout my coverage in the early years only, whether it was election, whether it was climate change, whether it was anything, in a conflict zone, every sort of reporting, I realized that there is so much missing because we are not asking questions to women. And I was hearing these stories when I'm on the ground. They're telling me that, stuff like stories which were in Jharkhand, for example, when witch hunting happens, but you're there to go and cover elections, but you're not writing about that. So it would always bother me. I would go tell my editors that I'm covering Jharkhand elections, but I would end up doing multiple stories with a gender lens. And it was just I would also do mainstream stories, what they would call mainstream, which would cater to all sorts of audience. But in the process, I also learned that I have to tell those stories, otherwise it won't be told. So stuff like that. And throughout my reporting, the ones that you wanted to talk about, for which I won the Ladli Award, Kashmir, it was conflict zone, Haryana, all the places that I chose also particularly, or even throughout my reporting, the places that I choose are where patriarchy is rampant, where it is extra difficult to access any sort of anything for women. It is doubly hard. And that layer was missing throughout what I understood. And when I started doing it, is when I realized there's so much to be told, and it's not over. There's just a lot of stories to be told.
Couldn't agree more, because the way narratives go and the ways history even gets written is from a certain lens and a certain perspective. And our understanding of society around us, if you're saying the mainstream is, the male perspective, then obviously it is, largely biased, from having an equal participation and equal understanding of, the scenarios. Couldn't agree more. I think we should really unpack that idea a lot more in the next as we continue the discussion. But Preeti, you've had a long career in branding and communications, from working with others to founding your own company, working with multiple brands, across mediums, from print to digital to ads to so on. So tell us a little bit about your journey of creativity. When did it start? Why branding and communications? And from there, tell us a little bit about how you have utilized the gender lens in your work.
So, what Manjeet and Adrija were saying, I think it's very important, the culture. And like them, my parents were fiercely, gender equality flag bearers. And my father, my mother was very, very strong, a strong woman. And to me, actually, the whole journey started with saying, I will not let my parents ever miss that they don't have a son. We were two sisters. So the whole ambition was to get my dad off the ship. He used to keep traveling, and my mother would be in tears. So it was the whole thing of, earning fast and making sure you earn as much as him so he gets off the ship. So that was that I was, kind of obsessed with not letting them miss a son. So I did my literature, and I did not go into teaching as I had planned before, because that meant going through MA and stuff like that, and I had to get a job fast so that my dad gets off the ship fast. So that is how I got into advertising. Actually, I used to write poetry and all that, but I wanted to start earning, and that was the whole the thing that drove me to advertising. Once there, you realize that the industry moves on merit. Yes, the timings are very, very bad. Right now, it is not as bad because of technology. But at that time when we joined, if you have to complete something, you have to stay in the office for 8 hours. And my mother didn't know what I was doing. Advertising was very new. I used to come home at 4 o'clock, leave home at 9. So she used to wonder what is this job, and it was always a question mark. But it's one of those places where you really enjoy working, and there is a certain amount of quality that happens in the workplace as well, because there is so much fun. You're always, and at that time you're only targeting women. So in all kinds of, it's not formal. It lets you grow. It lets you meet all kinds of people, all facets of society. It allows you to open up and become very independent. And then it flowers creativity. And as a person itself, or as a family, I have different kinds of people. We are a close-knit family of 20. So it's like, creative writing is about understanding human behavior and keeping your senses open all the time. And that's how it, went there. Actually, the sensitivity and gender sensitivity into advertising, Sharda of Ladli was very much responsible for us to all become sensitive, actually, because you don't think, when you're doing an ad or you're doing branding, you never really think that you can make a difference by putting in a progressive stream in what you're projecting. And Sharda made us think of that. And I met her at population first. And from there on, every time we question, a brief or a creative piece, saying, can we push it towards becoming woman centric? Can we make it more gender sensitive, which we were not doing before? And even now, there are a lot of lapses. It doesn't come to you naturally because you just go ahead and do the ad. So I think that is where we started, becoming sensitive. But creativity was, came after the whole push of saying women are equal to men. I will earn as much as any son would have earned. And then advertising happened to get me there.
No, that's fantastic. And advertising. I mean, I was just laughing, and I think we'll all associate with some of the memories that you shared about parents wondering, okay, why this child is working till so late, because there was a whole generation where parents didn't parents were used to jobs that ended at 5, and then you join consulting or even tech, and you're working odd hours. And I've known companies even till 5 to 7 years back in India who were doing counseling for parents. So they brought in, for example, some of the big 4 consulting firms actually brought in parents, especially parents of the female employees, and gave them an orientation saying, okay, it is fine, your child is actually working. We do work late hours. We have overseas clients, all of that. So it's a lot that needs to be done sometimes to educate and get the social acceptance to things. Manrit, I think you were laughing as well at this, at this memory. I could.
Yeah, because same. I worked in advertising as well. So Preeti was saying that, and I could see the images from my advertising days. And because of my background, I was at that time what is called a strategic planner. I don't know if they still have it, but it was sort of a bridge between the client side and the creative side. And I would actually get brickbats from both sides, because the creative side would be like, wow, what are you conceptualizing? Nobody's interested in this, we want visuals. And then the client would be like, you understand the strategy, the brand has to convey these values. And I would be like, okay, how do I get these to marry? Yeah, but good fun.
Fantastic. So, like, let's now look a little bit closer to your writing, like, each one of you, and so Manpreet, let's do a deep dive into Radiance, right? Because it's a very complex book, many layers, 3 epochs. You've got protagonists of different ages. I mean, you talked about fate and faith, right? So there is aspects of fate and faith as well. You're bringing in the Mahabharata. So there's many things, and you're talking about the macro theme, the societal themes. You're talking about personal journeys and personal loss. So how did you how did that the story let's talk a little bit about the story, and then we'll get into the gender lens around it.
Right. Yeah, so the Radiance of a Thousand Suns, as said, is a sort of a multi-generation saga, which is set between India and New York City. And it's the journey of a young woman who's trying to trace another woman, because that woman's story will seal the book that she's writing, which her father had started writing. So, sort of that is the bare bones of the plot. But to go back and deep dive into the novel, I think when I started writing that short story in 2001 in Singapore, Radiance was the book that I was looking to write, but I was, woefully inadequate for that journey. And I'm glad I wasn't equipped at all, because I don't think I would have been able to write the book the way I finally managed to. And the reason for that is that, writing The Long Walk Home, which is my first book, which took me 9 years, taught me a lot of things about history, about our society, about the role of women. And it clarified to me that there were certain things which were there, but either we were unaware or we chose to ignore it. And for instance, I always go back to 1947 because it is such a pivotal event in our modern Indian history, certainly, and the fact that every 15th August and 26th January, we sort of celebrate it, we mark the nationhood. And that is a very male narrative, how all these leaders, brought us to independence, and that justifiably so. But I also think that there is another event that happened bang with independence, which was partition. These were 2 concomitant events. They happened at the same time. And the kafilas that erupted with partition, which is refugees moving both in Punjab and Bengal, eastwards and westwards, is considered the largest migration in modern human history, almost 15 million people within a period of 3 months. We also had 3 to 5 million, it's disputed, people who died. And the victims of the violence, to a large extent, were women. However, that fact is never brought out. Women's stories are never talked about. And I became acutely aware that history is really his story. Where are women's narratives in that? There is this African proverb which says that until the lions learn to tell their own story, the history of the tale will always celebrate the hunters. And I think, you just have to flip the coin, because all historical writing or history writing, because what is history? It is not really the past. It is a retelling of the past. It is trying to reconstruct what had happened. And if you're not going to have women, who in any case are half of 50% of the population, and who were the majority ones to suffer, then what history are we really talking about? So that was my sort of understanding of it. And since I grew up in Firozpur, I had ideas about how women's stories had been totally neglected. Women were not allowed to speak up. There was the entire code of honor, which is bound, sadly, in a woman's vagina, So these were the kind of stories which were in my mind. And I wanted to write a novel with this as the background. But the fact is, a novel finally is a story. You want people to read it. And hopefully, if it's written well, then they will also be illuminated besides being entertained. And I think that was really my journey. The way I decided I would do it is it would strongly be women's stories. So the protagonists are all women and they're telling their stories. It is a multi-generation saga. So there are women who suffer during 47. And there is a woman who's unfortunate enough to suffer the same thing in 84 as well. And this is not a made up case. There were women, there are instances. And I have gone and met people with whom what they suffered in 47, they saw it happen in their families in 84 again in Delhi. And I wanted us to, through the narrative, I wanted to make a person question, what do we take for granted? What questions are we not asking? And what is really happening in the world that we ignore? So that sort of journey I try to tell through a quest, because this is Nikki, the 35-year-old woman who's the narrator of the book, who's writing this story, who's trying to trace this woman, Jyot, who is in New York City, to get the story and to complete the book that her father had started. And her father used to work with the victims of 84. And the reason I brought in New York City was that in my own journey, when I moved from Hong Kong to New York City, I had no idea. I was working on the Meherun-Nisa series. The first 2 books had been written. I was actively into the third. But I felt that something happened in the city in my own interactions with people. And I felt that I needed to urgently go back to the story which I had been carrying with me for almost 15 years by then, which became Radiance. And this is that, in New York City, the cab drivers, yellow cab drivers, the majority of them are either Arabs or they're Sardars from Punjab. And I remember one of the first times I got into a cab and this person was not turbaned. He was a brown person. He could be Hispanic. He turns to me and he says, Kidda. Now, Kidda is a handy catchphrase in Punjabi for how are you or howdy. And my daughter, who was 12 years old, totally broke out. She was like, how does this person even know who you are? This is so creepy. You know how teenagers that age people talk. And I was like, no. He probably saw, my kada that I wear, or he saw something in my face and it suggested that, I come from the same place, but we had a perfectly fine conversation in Punjabi. And then I started, sort of talking to people and figuring that the violence post 9/11, one of the very first victim of the hate crime was a Sikh man in Arizona, a turbaned Sikh man. Because for most Americans, a turbaned man is an Arab. They don't know anything beyond that. And then I also read stories of people who had fled after 84 seeking asylum in the US, like they did in the UK and Canada. And I could see that arc of violence, which is not just a linear arc, it's also an arc which travels across continents. So that was the reason why the book needed to be in 2 places. And the Mahabharata really was sort of the scaffolding on which I string this, because I feel that all our stories, all our archetypes are derived from that. I mean, I find it difficult to believe that what happened to Draupadi is not the reason why a lot of the attitudes towards women in India do not exist. I mean, I'll take a very simple example. We say, Draupadi ka vastra haran. Why should Draupadi be victimized? Why do we not say Kauravo ne kiya vastra? Why is the gaze always as the women as the victim? And that's what I wanted to shift. And I wanted people to think about the connections, which are not just now, which is not just 84 or 47. They are very, very deep. And until we start asking questions and digging deep, we will not be able to address these issues.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, there is stories that come around, right? They say there is only a few original stories, and everything else is follows in similar themes or similar archetypes. But going back a little bit to the idea of the personal loss, and often women's writing talks a lot more about the personal loss, and it talks a little less about the societal tragedy, right? So as you were writing, Radiance, was there something that you brought into mind, or there were stories during research that you gathered where you saw that there was a different viewpoint of men and women looking at both personal loss and societal loss, because both faced both of these?
That's a very good question, Amrita, because when I started doing the research, a lot of my research was also oral research, because I tried to go back and find people to speak with. The people who suffered during 47, a lot of them are, elderly, loss of memory. Memory doesn't work in a linear way. With 84, there is still a lot of angst. There's a desire not to talk about it. I got shouted at for, bringing up old memories. I enrolled in a course in trauma studies in New York City to understand how trauma is, how do you address it? How does a body cope with trauma? And so I'll just suggest a few sort of instances which I became aware of. Like in 1947, when women came to the camps, there were these clerks, all of them male, who would record, who the woman was, where she had come from, what had happened to her. And women would use a euphemism to talk about rape. They would say they had been badly used, right? Now therefore, when the clerks recorded, they never said the women had been brutalized or sexualized or raped. It was never recorded. And now one can speculate why. Maybe they did not want to record it. Maybe they did not understand. But women are saying something. They're telling their story, but their stories are not being heard. Similarly, the women who had suffered trauma and came back and were recovered by their families were told to just seal their mouths. They were not supposed to talk about what had happened to them. So, I feel that with men, there is a complicity in the violence of 47, because unlike the Jewish Holocaust, where there is a very clear enemy, the Nazis versus the Jews, in our Holocaust, there is no clear enemy. It was a neighbor turning upon a neighbor. It was an erstwhile brother turning upon a brother. So none of the men could claim that I didn't do this. We were all complicit. So for the men, the only option really was to look forward. Let's bury it, look forward. Whereas the women on both sides who had suffered so much were told to just silence them, their mouths and not speak about it. So yes, women bear trauma and process it very differently from men. And I also think that since a majority of our history telling and even our novels thus far have been told by men, the gaze is very different. And I say that when men write, they write the male view. When women write, they write the world. And the reason for that is very simple, because women, work through networks, they work through relationships. A woman is never just a person. She's a mother, a daughter, a sister. There are so many roles that she brings into it. And therefore, the way a woman looks at the world is always via those relationships. And which is why it was very clear in the writing of Radiance, the story had to be the women's for telling. And that's the way it would go. In fact, I remember at some point in the middle of it, I was writing, and my husband, who is the first reader of all my drafts, he looks at me and says, "Ye bikne wala nahi hai, and there are no men in this book."
No, I mean, and it's not just about history and trauma. I recently interviewed an author a few months back. She's written a book called Chup, which is actually looking at stories of younger women, and these were all, and she, purposely chose women who were sort of in their 20s to 40s to understand how they were looking at, their perspectives on life, and from that emerged this whole notion of silence, because that silence is still taught even today. It wasn't there. It wasn't just a generational thing. It is there even today, and across the board, right? So, Adrija, your stories are actually trying to unbreak that silence that women have been in, and I can see that some of your stories are stories of positivity, right? Girls playing football, or some of them are stories of achievement, women qazis, and how they get accepted in a particular, in their domain. And others are stories of trauma or mental health, or the women body burners. So tell us a little bit about, how do you find the story? How do the stories find you? And then from there, how do you look at the, why this lens, and how does this lens come about? And what are some of these, on the ground stories that you're hearing from the women that you've met and researched and interviewed?
Right. Thank you, Amrita. So the stories that we are talking about, the football players in Haryana, was about this village in Haryana, absolutely nondescript village called Alakpura, where all the girls in that village play football. And I'm every time I talk about this story, I get amused myself because Haryana is otherwise known to be so patriarchal. The sex ratio is terrible, and this village where all the girls played football was just so cool. And I bumped into the story through actually a regional reporter who works out of Haryana. I found out about it, and I looked for it, and there was no report, there was no evidence of that happening actually. So I just knew there's an Alakpura FC club which is a part of the women's national football team, and they played there, but other than that I didn't know much. So I just went to the village to find out about these girls. uh, Now, while they were heroes in that village, okay, they have completely changed the whole idea of what a woman is in that particular village. Men follow them. Young boys are learning football now. They're terrible at it. The girls are so much better, but they're learning how to play football because they have seen these girls get jobs, get employed in government jobs, and they have seen how their houses have turned from mud houses to brick houses. So these girls are inspirational, and they are not the ones who are getting married at 12, 13, which is again the idea that we have about Haryana largely, or a lot of northern India for that matter. They are not, and they're being able to choose when they want to marry, etc., etc. So this was Haryana, but for example, the other story about mental health of women in Kashmir, uh, that didn't really, it wasn't a story that I had to hunt for. It was just there. There was enough data to suggest that women in Kashmir are suffering a lot more than men are. Okay, in comparison, mental health is bad in a conflict area. We are all aware of that. So but the numbers that showed that women are have more anxiety, they are more likely to get schizophrenia, all of those, right? Everything was at least 50% higher than an average man in Kashmir. And again, the same thing for me, the numbers were the story, and somebody had to go there and get their voices, which was again not done before. When we read stories of Kashmir and when we read about women from Kashmir, it's a lot. It's a lot about uh, losing their husbands or their children, or mothers and wives of people who are in the conflict zone. This is the kind of stories we read. We don't really hear about women who are actually. So my story was not just about, hey, look, this is how they're suffering. My story was about women who are secretly finding clinics, breaking taboos, not listening to their parents, and going and finding a mental health cure. And it's very hard to do that. Thankfully, there are some doctors who have created this Facebook communities. Through social media, young girls are being able to reach out. There are secret clinics across Kashmir where girls are being able to reach out. So my story was about these girls who are being able to change that. Although they are some form of victims, they are victims in a conflict zone, and they're victims of patriarchy, but they're trying to change their whole future. And even with the other one about female qazis, that was their idea. So I have tried to kind of look at any stories that I drew. Honestly, I do try to look for women who are changing the narratives, and not just look at women as victims only. That we know the data, we know all of that, but is there something that they're doing? Because the idea is always that women weaker sex, and we know that they are forcibly forced to become that weaker sex. But there are within this community, within the people, whether it's Haryana, where there are paros who are married multiple times and married off to brothers and their brothers, and are remarried multiple times, basically sold off actually. uh, there are these women in that community who are trying to get voting rights now. So I like writing about these people because you hear the stories of, okay, this is what is happening to women. It's sad. Okay. But you don't hear the next part of the story where, hey, there are also these women who are trying to change that. So for me, that is very important. So when I'm on the ground, I'm also reporting on anything. I think it's always, I try to talk to a lot of women. I think that is the best way to find stories. And they tell you, go and meet this woman. She's been giving us, helping us getting this ration card, stuff like that. And it's incredible. So I think stories are not just something that land to me, but mostly I'm always trying to chase for those gender stories, honestly.
No, that's fantastic. And how has uh, your ability to find stories changed over the last year, where it's been really difficult to go to the ground and get the the real groundswell of what's happening?
Absolutely, it's been incredibly difficult. It's very upsetting. Every time I think that I'm not being able to be on the ground and report, um, it's been hard. But pandemic. I tried throughout the pandemic as soon as it hit. In fact, I tried looking at it from gender lens. I did a series of stories immediately trying to look at all the implications that it was happening on your reproductive rights. It was so difficult during the lockdown to just go and access any sort of reproductive health care. And there were so many stories out there. People were reaching out to me, asking me for help, and I am not even a person who can help. I can only write stories. So it was really hard for a lot of women who were, especially people who were living alone and everything, right? Also, lockdown with families. That was also very challenging
Yeah.
to just go and get any sort of emergency contraceptive, etc. I looked at domestic violence, stuff like this. I kept tracking throughout. Uh, it increased multifold, right? It was called the shadow
Yes.
pandemic. So,
Yes.
uh,
Yeah.
I mean, that is what I've been able to do through the pandemic, although I haven't been able to be on the ground. But thankfully, with the help of some people who are there on the ground doing some phenomenal work with NGOs and groups like that. I've been able to, and there is now I'm trying to collate data also on it. I'm trying to collate data on women who have lost jobs. So women have
Mm.
been affected by the pandemic in so many ways, and again, yeah. So that's what I've been trying to look at through the pandemic, about dropping out of schools, about child trafficking, um, and yes, so I have been able to do that. Very limited. I would honestly want to be on the ground to be able to do those stories, but I have been able to, at least through data and analysis, I've been able to track some of those. At least touch upon the
That's
points so far.
that's fantastic. So, Preeti, turning to you, I mean, you did say that Dr. Sharda sort of triggered a set of thoughts in you and in different people in the media and advertising industry to start looking at ads and the story arcs differently. So tell us a little bit more about what has changed in the last uh, 10 years, in terms of storytelling. As a consumer, I do see some of the stories, I can see Share the Load, I can see Tanishq, I can see a few brands which have adopted this. So how much of an advocacy do you need to do, even with the brand managers, to get them to accept a story which is slightly different? And, from the idea and inspiration perspective, how do you have, how have, branding experts shifted their own lens to look at some of these stories?
So I'll tell you, when we started first, it was it is a given. The cliches are given. You don't really think. There is a research done among people. What you get is then what's put in, and then you have to portray the same thing. I think the biggest shift we need to make is, if we have, and I include journalism and writing, and and it's like a weapon given to you. Not everybody has that opportunity, that you can put in progress into the society in a given medium, and we are fortunate to have that. So I think that is the biggest learning for me, and whatever I have told my teams that work with me, is that when you have this weapon, use it to bring progress, not to just reflect what you see. And half the time we are always expected to reflect what research tells you. And my fight always with marketing has been that there is no point. If you are a large brand, you need to take that risk. You don't have to pussyfoot. You have to take that risk because you can. And you can see that in the last 10 years, there has been a change in the portrayal of the housewife, the portrayal of the mother, the portrayal of the wife. It is, I'm not saying it's 100% there, But today, the antennas go up far faster. The women groups are becoming far more vocal. So everybody is a little careful about not presenting women in that cow-like avatar that we used to before. The doormat that is only wanting to please everybody in the house.
Yeah.
And that is the brief you used to get.
Yeah.
A loving woman who wants children to be happy, husband. Arey, what is this? What about herself? So that has changed. She lives her life through her child. You keep getting this even today, and it's enough. The point is, even if there is a whole faction living like that, it is your duty to make them see that you can live a different way. It doesn't mean you have to be completely rebellious. It's about how you portray the person in the house. You equip the woman to say something, to rule the house like she wants. And that power we have today as advertising people or as journalists or as authors, to change the society the way it looks at it. And we should use that. So I think what we started thinking, like for instance, I'll give you a simple example. If it's about a family, it used to always be mother, father, son. It will never be mother, father, daughter.
Mm.
It doesn't even come to your mind. Complete family is mother, father, son. It's never, except for Rasna as a brand which only did girls. You see any advertising at that time, it was completely, there has to be a boy child in that. That all is changing today. Today you can see that it doesn't matter. The girls are there, the girls are taking the lead. So I feel that change has happened. And a lot has changed in terms of the way women are portrayed, even in in male ads, and not as sex symbols. And so a lot of that is happening. I think a lot more has to happen, and that will happen. I'm very positive because I really love the way this whole voice of women is right there today, thanks to technology and creativity. I'll tell you, it is now no longer about sparks and stuff like that. It is a very responsible job. Today's day and age, it is a very responsible job. Yes, in that responsibility, you can be creative, but at the same time, you have to sell the brand, you have to make the product work, and you have to have people to like you. So those are the things, and in that, I feel that we have to put that little underlining of how do you make this about women progress? Little ways. What she wears, for instance, how she talks, can she whistle, can she wink? Things that are not allowed otherwise because our women don't do it. They don't do it, but they are the same women who are watching cinema, right? People who watch advertising are no different from people who watch cinema. They are showing a lot of progress, then why should advertising not be progressive? So that is where we are trying to put those little, why should it be a boy? Let it be a girl. Let the older person be the girl and the younger person be the boy. We have made those mistakes as well, in the past. But now we are aware. I think that is where we can, if we become aware, and somebody has to lead the process. Fortunately for me, I was associated with Ladli. I was also the boss, so it helps that then you make sure it happens down the line, and you start making people think like that.
No, I think it's as all of you said, it's about the stories of hope and about the stories of change makers, and not just about and about everyday change makers, right? People that each and everyone can associate with. So let's talk a little bit about how the needle has changed a little bit in the last few years, and also bring in a little perspective on the male readers or the male viewers, and see what is your view of the change that you are seeing. So when we specifically looking at you and the writing, I mean, a lot of female writing obviously has focused on the woman being the victim, or the woman being somebody who really submits to life and to fate, and doesn't really try to carve her way through, right? And when you are crafting your stories, you're looking at different periods of time, and you're looking at crafting protagonists of different age groups. So, is there a lens that you're bringing in over there of showing progress, or showing somebody who likes to take life and chart their life on their own terms? And is it generational? Are you showing the younger women behaving in a particular way, but the older women still in a particular way? Like, how is it in your writing? And
Yeah,
any
so
feedback that you have from male readers, for example, on these women that you've created?
yeah, I think, I mean, I see myself first as a storyteller, and the characters in the story are there because they have to serve the purpose of the story. So I do not start out with the lens that, oh, I have to make this woman progressive, or I have to make this woman feisty, or, not, that's not. I have to be true to the character that I'm writing. And fortunately for me, my interest is not in writing what Preeti so beautifully put, cow-like women. And the reason for that also is because the women who brought me up, the region that I grew up in. I mean, I grew up with some really remarkable women. I mean, I find it astonishing that Punjab continues to be a land of patriarchy despite the women it has. I mean, women who nurtured me, who raised me, were strong-minded, opinionated, and I'm not talking about my mother alone. So I've seen women like this even in workspace, which is not to say that that women do not exist who prefer to take the path of no friction, who would opt for the path where it is easier rather than having to stand up. So as I said, so my task as a storyteller is to be true to the character, and while I'm trying to tell the character's story, I am very aware that when you show, for instance, violence against women has become a trope, which is why when I was writing Radiance, I wanted it to be the women's story. If the woman is telling the story of the violence that she has faced, how does she look at it? What is her lens? How does she talk about it? Who has the agency here? That is very important to me when I'm telling the story. And as for readership, in fact, some of my strongest feedback for Radiance has come from young women. And in Radiance, really, the youngest woman is the daughter who's 12 years old, the mother is 35. But these are young college-going girls who have written to me and talk about how, one, they never knew what really happened during 47. And they really love a character in the story who's Noura, who's an illiterate, uneducated woman, who's taken in as a 6-year-old girl who has suffered in the violence of 47 and raised. But Noura, I actually based off a woman when I was growing up, and she was Muslim, and her name was Noura, who used to work in a house. And the woman had such spirit. To this day, I remember her stories, the way she would tease me, or the way she would talk with my mother. And that kind of feistiness is what I wanted to capture in Noura. And in my Mehrunissa series, where Mehrunissa is again, the protagonist, I mean, she's not a female Bond, she's just a thinking woman who is keen to solve the problem that she's facing. And her admirers are all men. I am amazed at the kind of messages, emails, social media comments that I get from men. There are men who have told me repeatedly, one, they really want me to write book 3, and I have been waylaid by another project, but I promise them that I will come back to that. There are people like, if I marry, I want to marry a Mehrunissa. Where can I find my Mehrunissa? So it's not just sort of like a crass questioning. It's what Mehrunissa brings, the tenacity she brings, the way she's independent, the way she looks at things. I think that's what they're connecting with. So really, to sort of summarize, I would say that as a storyteller, you have to be true and authentic to your stories and to your protagonists. But as a woman writer, I feel that my protagonists will be strong women because those are the women I've seen. It's not unreal; these women exist. And that's what I bring to my story.
Often as a writer, I feel that the question that gets asked is, or you get bucketed as a woman writer rather than a writer, and so that's always a point of contention as far as I'm concerned, because you're telling a story, you're telling a reality, like you're telling a lens which is an equally valid lens rather than saying that it's a woman.
Yeah. I also look at the label. I hate labels because I write across genres. People tell me, "Oh, do you write thrillers as well? You write women's fiction?" I tell them I write stories, and for each story, you have to use a certain format. The story has to be told in a certain way. If it is a layered, complex story, it requires a different kind of. My sixth book is Girls in the City, which is a fun, breezy read set in Bangalore, three young professional working women. That requires a very different kind of storytelling that I'm attempting there. And when people tell me that you're a woman writer, I take it on, I accept it because I'm a woman and I'm a writer, yes. And I write with a lens which looks at women with interest. So, yes, call me a woman writer, call me whatever you want to. It doesn't bother me.
So Adrisha, you obviously told us earlier that you like to capture the stories of hope, right? You like to capture the stories of change makers. So tell us a little bit about, do these women that you've captured through the stories, do they see themselves as having that agency, as having, the power to change? And also, what is, there is a power to showcasing a woman who's creating change in life and society around her. And often, the stories that we hear a lot more in the media are the stories of women entrepreneurs or women CEOs and so on, which looks at it from a lens. It also looks at exceptional women. So where do you think people are drawing inspiration from as you meet younger women? Who do they draw inspiration from?
So, in Kashmir, the women who are going to these secret clinics are not extraordinary women. They're women like you and me. They're women out there. They're regular women who are living their lives and just know that they need to take care of their mental health. It's as simple as that, and they're just doing it. I also don't want to call them some brave women. They're just doing what otherwise is very difficult to do in a place like that, or what otherwise has been hard for them. Historically, it has been hard for them. So they are making the changes, but it's just what they are supposed to do as independent women. In Haryana, when they're playing, it's about them actually wanting to find a job or wanting to have better livelihood. So again, they are doing what they feel is right, what they need to do to be able to earn a living and be independent in the society. So these are just ordinary women, but also living extraordinary is, according to us, it is extraordinary because they come from such difficult conditions. That's the thing I would say. But when you ask me about whether how their agency is changing and how they're being able to exert their agencies, through my different stories. So one of the series that I had worked on during Lok Sabha elections, actually, and it was a very unique experience for me. And I went across UP. I traveled across UP only speaking to women. Through different stories, and that usually doesn't happen. So I went up to my editor telling him that, I read election stories, but they're always about who's going to be winning, or there are some developmental issues that, okay, there's this place that has some form of issues between Hindus, Muslims, communal violence, etc., etc. How are women voting? We don't have enough evidence on that. We don't have enough data on that. We have probably like one book that Pranay Ghosh has written, which is just like one chapter on how women vote, but there is not enough. Sorry, Pranay Roy has written. I got that author now. So so there's not enough evidence to show how women vote or whether they vote according to what their husbands tell them. Right? And when I traveled across Uttar Pradesh, I realized that's a complete myth. They don't vote according to what their husbands tell them. They really have decided on who to vote according to what they feel is right, what will benefit them. Obviously, then there is the caste, community, all of that things. There are layers to it, and especially in a place like Uttar Pradesh. But the most important thing, that they vote according to what the man in the family says, is completely wrong. They probably go and cast a vote to completely another person with their husband will ask them to vote. They will not listen to them. I think, what I realized was that while we don't write enough of those stories, those are the real tales. Women, a lot of times, they're not allowed to obviously exercise their right. We are aware of that. But these are ordinary women who are just living lives and being able to exercise their right, and that's as simple as that. Okay. When I did that whole series of stories trying to understand through women, whether women in the low caste community, or whether women who are working or in the urban class, who are say teachers, students, etc., etc., they're very politically aware. Okay. And again, to repeat myself, but we do not speak to them when we cover elections. So I feel like, there is just, yeah, I mean, to answer your question, going round and round about it, but I think it is possible to have those answers only when you speak to women, and that is when you realize that yes, they're being able to exercise their right, and that is the narrative that I have been able to build over the last many years that I have been reporting. And had I not spoken to those women, it wouldn't have been the same. And to other part of your question, when I write these stories, there have been people who have commented, who have reached out to me saying, for the female Kazis one, they've reached out to me saying, thank you for doing this story because she got help through a female Kazi. Now, when I went around Rajasthan and Jaipur asking men about what they thought of female Kazis, they said they're just NGO workers. They obviously completely dismiss them as some women's rights organization who are not doing any work. But at the same time, people are scared of them. So when a woman goes up to these female Kazis and registers a complaint, they will immediately call up the husband and say, please, aap idhar tashrif laiye. And they're shit scared of that. And they do have to do that because they're Kazis, they are Islamic clerics, and they have, by law, they are now Islamic clerics. But even the male Kazi, who is supposed to be the main Kazi of Jaipur, he doesn't take them seriously. That is there, but the fact that they can do that, it makes a lot of women feel empowered. And when they read about them, it is a question of empowerment.
No, I think it's every drop that counts, right? Like, so at least, even if it is not a full scale change, every step matters, and every step is important. Yeah. So, Preeti, from your perspective, again, I mean, you've talked a little bit about the shift that you have seen in the, in the industry, when you're looking at creating stories. But who are the change makers in this case? Are there enough male champions? What are the viewers or the buyers saying? Because ultimately, when you're creating advertising and stories, it is to sell a particular product. Right? It is to shift and create certain buying habits of people from product A to product B. So do these stories, which are different or which are written from a specific lens, are they appealing to the viewers? And in the industry in general, are you seeing champions who are of both genders, so that it becomes a lot more sort of ingrained as a behavior, and a systemic shift can happen?
Yes, I think the clear brand or product that you see is the beauty products. You clearly see a shift in that. Earlier, everything in the beauty category was about male attraction. You get better, so you get a man. You get better, so a man looks it. I think that has slowly made a shift to you will enhance your looks to do something, to achieve something, to whatever, get confidence or make a change in society or whatever. That I think that cliche is slowly going out. And I think marketers are there enough to have guts. And I'm underlining that, you need to have the guts to say, no, it is not about how you portray women that will sell your product or not sell your product. It is about the story. Finally, if you have a good, interesting story, and in that, if you portray the woman in good light, there is no reason why your product should not sell if it's a good product. This is all, this is all conditioning. कि cliche दिखाओ, जो है वो दिखाओ तो बिकेगा. It is not true. You take the risk. You start looking. Look at Tanishq. Tanishq has completely changed the way the language of advertising is spoken where women are concerned, and they are doing damn well. So I mean that is one brand. Or Monica, for instance, if you see what they did with the mother, egging on the child. It's not about the mother stirring milk all the time and saying pure beta. It's about a very hardcore woman who's saying, I have achieved, you will achieve. And you see the characterizing of the woman, the way she is, what she talks. So those are examples that are there in front of us, and they have had very successful campaigns for their brands. So I feel that there are marketers now, standing with you, and I think it's also about advertising agencies pushing, or at least making them see the light. I don't think anybody is going to say कि नहीं करना है, but I think we need to logically steer them in that way, give them examples, show them how it can be, because sometimes there is the scare of itna paisa kharcha karenge if it goes wrong. So you need to do your homework. You need to be very clear on what you're doing, and I think it is happening. It will keep happening progressively as all women come together, and I'm seeing that happening, that women are coming together. They are pointing faults. Internet is an open forum. Anything that is even in a small way going regressive gets picked up and shamed. So that is good. I think that will all help together for us to move further and further. There are some brands that still don't take the risk, but I think it will happen.
That's fantastic, and yeah, as a viewer, we can see definitely a change in many brands and the messaging that they put out. So we're sort of at 7:10 now, and so we could go on for another a long time, but as we have to wrap up, so as we wrap up, I would actually invite each of you to give two messages. One is your message to the women content creators out there on how they can shape and craft their own creative journeys. And secondly, what is your life mantra as a woman that other women can borrow from? So Manpreet, let's start with you.
I think my sort of central theme for my own work, and what I also tell my own daughter and young women, young people, men, boys alike, is I think ask questions, question the status quo. That to me is very important, because I was taught that very early, as I said, by feminist parents. My father was a lawyer, and he would always say that don't raise your voice, give me a better argument, argue better with me. And and you can only argue if you know your facts, if you've done your homework, if you know what you're talking about, and then you say, what is my view on this? And I really feel that we need to start questioning the status quo, start questioning why should things be the way they are. Preeti said wonderfully in marketing how, we look at cliches, we assume they are the truth. Now, of course, cliches exist because they have worked for some time. But in the end, it is every person's story. It is what story are you trying to tell? And if the story is good, people will listen. I mean, that is our most ancient instinct, right? Sitting around a fire and listening to the story. And as I tell people, I feel fortunate compared to that storyteller, because then if people didn't like the story, they would club the storyteller to death. Here you have the distance, you have books, you have media, you have your publisher. But yeah, I think start with questioning everything.
Fantastic. Adrija?
If I were to give a message to young journalists at this point of time, I would say don't be a journalist. But that's not something that I should say probably. No, I fully agree with Manpreet actually asking questions. In fact, just one story that came to my mind, and I would want to share that story with you guys. In the pandemic, there were these bunch of young girls who I found who stopped child marriages, like their own child marriages, by simply asking questions. They just kept calling their teachers, and they were offline education, so they were not being able to go to schools, and just being like, why should I get married? Who is this person you're getting me married to? All of that. So there were at least 3-4 girls who managed to not get married at like 12 or 13. So I think that's very important. But as journalists, I would say, a lot of editors, and I've worked now I have worked with a lot of younger people, so it's easier for me to say that I'm going to do this gender story. Or even with the awards, that becomes easier. You can just say that, okay, I'm good at this, I'll be able to do it, just let me do it. It's not easy for everyone. You can't just pitch a gender story and just say that I'm going off, give me travel budget for it. So, but at the same time, I would say which is why any stories that journalists do, or younger journalists do, whether it's politics, whether it's sports, whether it's environment, anything, they should be asking questions to women. On the ground, just speak to women. In the Delhi riots also, any sort of situation like this, women had different set of stories to share, and those can't be ignored. So we should keep asking those questions. Yes.
Fantastic. Preeti?
So my message to the younger people has always been is, don't give up, don't stop. We always find women leaving advertising too fast, for many other reasons which are extraneous to a career. To me, keep at it for some time. Keep at it. It will happen. Don't crumble under whatever pressure that you are. That is one, and my message is that you must earn. You can give it up later, but first earn. Earn money. Show you are capable of earning money to the world. Then you take a choice of not, but let people know that you're capable of it. I think it's a very important thing not just in Indian society, over the world. The respect of a woman by default comes when she's working. It is a mindset across the world. And I always tell them, let's earn something, give up after that if you want. But tell everybody that you can do it. That is been my mantra for every girl, young girl that I meet. So I continue to say that.
Fantastic. Somebody had told me once, like, make it a comma, don't make it a full stop. And I think that is so important when you speak with younger women, and when you said, like, for extraneous reasons, if they don't stick around, it's very important to have that message. But, a huge thank you to each one of you. And a huge thanks to Dr. Sharda for all the amazing work that she does and the Ladli Media Awards. She couldn't join us today, but hopefully in another edition we'll have her and her views and how she's worked on impacting the girl child and the gender conversations. But again, a huge thanks to each of you, Manpreet, Advija, and Preeti, for being here, for sharing your views, and for inspiring our viewers today on Winning Minds. Thank you.
Thank you,
Amrita.
Lovely session.
Yes, lovely meeting all of you too.
Yeah,
Great
same here.
All right.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.